This is Thank You Mama, weekly lessons from mothers all around the world. Hello and welcome to Thank You Mama. My name is Anna Teider. My guest today is Kate Kripke. Kate is talking to us from Boulder, Colorado. She's a psychotherapist, a coach, and a consultant, and she's specialized in maternal mental health and wellness. She's also the author of Reinventing Supermom, the co-host of Motherhood Uncut podcast, and founder of Parent and Family Wellness Center in Boulder. Hi, Kate, and welcome.
Hi, Anna. I'm so excited to be here having this conversation.
I am extremely excited. We already had a conversation. You had me as a guest on your Motherhood Uncut podcast, and we just had such an amazing time talking to each other together with Deb. And I remember leaving the conversation. I was so uplifted. I was floating.
Oh, well, you're easy to float along with.
Oh, thank you.
I think there was such a meeting of minds in that conversation, which always feels so good.
It was. And so it's very exciting. We're doing that again.
Agreed.
Tell me, did I miss anything? Because reading about you and researching about you, I was a little bit overwhelmed with how much you've done and moved and created. Did I miss anything in my introduction?
Oh my goodness. I mean, I'm sure we'll get into that blessing and curse of motivation to keep creating more and more, because I certainly inherited that from my own mother. But no, you got it in a nutshell. I think I have really dedicated my life's work to supporting mothers, women in their mental health journey. You know, I started with the sort of early maternal mental health, postpartum depression and anxiety. And really where I've landed now is that my niche, my specialty, my love is working with those high achieving women. It could be defined and high achieving in many different ways, who then go on to become mothers and really struggle with anxiety and motherhood. And I certainly am one of those women and mothers. And so that really is where my focus of my work and writing is right now.
Okay, that's absolutely brilliant. And thank you for doing that, because many women nowadays have this huge phase of their lives before they become wives and mothers, or just mothers. We're not like previous generations trained from early on that this is our fulfillment. We first create our fulfillment and find ourselves in our careers and hobbies and passions and relationships and friends. And then comes motherhood. And I know that for me, it was a ginormous shock. I wish somebody prepared me better for what a shock this is going to be, and how my life and I and my whole existence is going to change. It really turned my life upside down.
Yeah, it has a way of doing that, doesn't it? And
doesn't it?
I've worked in many different ways with mothers, women who are struggling with anxiety and depression. And I think really where my focus is right now, and my interest is in where all the beliefs that we bring to the table, right? As that we kind of grow up learning these they become sort of these fixed limiting beliefs about ourselves and the world around us. And then what happens is we have these little tiny humans, and those beliefs are, they're sort of rocked to their core. And so we need to then figure out, wait, how do I relate to myself and this little human and the world around me in a new way, because these beliefs I've had no longer fit. And I think that is really disorienting for people.
It is, because suddenly, after you've been more or less self-centered, suddenly everything turns around this other human being. And your body is not yours anymore, especially when they're newborn. You're just suddenly, your time is not yours, your energy is not yours, your body is not yours, your whole existence is completely dedicated to somebody else. And that's surprising. That's a shock to the system.
I think one of the things that, I mean, this is not a conversation about maternal mental health, but I can't help going here when I hear this. But I think one of the problems or the challenges actually is that belief that you just said, that our body is not ours, that our time is not ours, that our right. And in fact, those are the only things that are ours. I think what happens is that we end up focusing all of our attention and our desire to control and our problem-solving capacity on the things that are outside of us, which are not ours.
I don't know. For me, it wasn't a belief. For me, it was just my instinct of, I have to keep this child alive, and it's hungry every 2 hours and it needs to eat every 2 hours. It's asking to eat. So it's not so much a belief. It's just, that's what happens,
Well, it is what happens. And of course, if we're, I'm assuming this is true of you just because you're as human as I am. If we as women decide to no longer pay attention to those things as being ours, we become depleted. And then we're trying to feed and parent from an empty place. And that doesn't work. So we are definitely in service of, our body is in service of this other little human. But I think when we lose ourselves, we really struggle with a lot of anxiety. And I think that is, interestingly enough, one of the unhelpful lessons my mom taught me, and that I had to kind of renegotiate when I became a mother was, wait a second, if I am giving up all of myself in order to be in service of other people, I'm going to suffer. And I'm going to push back all the time on that belief that in order to be in service of others, we need to suffer in that process. So I think there's a both and that can make its way into those conversations, right? Which is sort of like, how do I really begin to differentiate between what is in my control versus not in my control, right? My own thoughts and my own actions are in my control. Nothing else is. And so how do I release my need to control everything else and then focus my healthy attention on how to work with my own thoughts and my own actions so that I can be as healthy as I need to be in service of other people. And right now we're talking about little humans that we need to keep alive, right? But of course, as you being of service in the world, in our work or our pursuits or our purpose, right? If we're only focusing on everything outside of us and not really bringing our attention to where we actually have agency and control, then we will burn out.
You mentioned Mom. Let's talk about her. Can you introduce her to me, and what is her name and where is she from and what's her story?
Yeah. So Margaret Fuller Lawson was born in Providence, Rhode Island in 1945. She was the youngest of 3 children.
That's a beautiful place to be born in.
Yeah. Yes. I think it's a beautiful place to be born in, especially if you are born into privilege, which my mother was. And she came from a line, she was born into a family of a fair amount of fortune, of resources, right, of privilege. And I think she was raised the youngest of 3 children in a family that expected great things of her. My mom's great aunt, so my great great aunt is Margaret Fuller, who was a leader in the women's suffrage movement. She really helped pioneer the movement that allowed women to vote, and Margaret Fuller, so my great great aunt, who my mom is named after, died in a shipwreck off the coast of Fire Island in New York. But she was only 32 when she died with her new husband and baby. No. Coming back to the United States from Italy, where her husband was from. And I think one of the reasons that that part of the story is so important is because she died so young, but she had done so much in her short, young life. Margaret Fuller was raised by a father who had two other boys. And in Margaret Fuller's time, very few girls went on to be educated the same way boys were. And Margaret Fuller's father said, I will send you to school just like your brothers, and you will do great things. And I actually wrote my 8th grade term paper on Margaret Fuller, my great. And one of the things I read in my exploration of her was a diary from when she was 10. And in her diary, she wrote, I will do great things and I will suffer for it. So when she was 10, she believed that to be true. She struggled with a lot of depression. Actually think Margaret Fuller probably was a lesbian and was not able to love the way she wanted to love, and, had to sort of push some of that aside. I gather that from her journals and her writing. She ended up marrying this Italian man and having a baby. But she really sacrificed herself in service of this work she was doing in the world. And so back to Margaret Fuller Lawson, my mother, she went to college, became a lawyer, married my dad, and became Margaret Lawson Shaw, and went on to break all kinds of glass ceilings in the field of law in New York City in the 60s and 70s, and really was one of the pioneers. My mom, Margaret Shaw, Lawson Shaw, was one of the pioneers in the field of mediation and arbitration. And really was one of the four mothers of that process, and became very, very renowned internationally for her work as a mediator, conflict dispute resolution and mediation, and went on to do amazing, amazing things. And when she was 71, my mom developed early Alzheimer's around age 69. This was before really people didn't really know about it. Us in our family knew that she was developing these symptoms of Alzheimer's. Her father had early Alzheimer's, my grandfather. My mom died suddenly and unexpectedly at age 71. And one of the last times I saw her, driving her to the airport from Colorado, from Boulder to Denver in Colorado, she said to me very tearfully, she said, I've been running for class president every day of my life. Oh. And I think that is where my deepest learning from my mom comes, is what is worth sacrificing, right? My mom died young, I believe, because she ran herself into the ground. I mean, she did amazing things. She was like the mother that everybody wanted as her mother. When I was growing up, everyone was like, I wish my mom was your mom. I mean, your mom was my mom. My mom, to be honest, was not home that often. I was raised in many ways by a babysitter with my younger brother, but when she was around, she was so around. But she was busy all the time. She didn't know how to slow down,
Yeah, it's a cutthroat world. I mean, the world of law in New York City, let alone in 1960s, being a woman among all the men, and pioneering a whole new field, I can't even imagine.
That's right. And she was really proud of being that person. I mean, again, as someone trained in psychology and being a psychotherapist, I know where that came from. She was the youngest child of 3 and had to prove herself in her family all the time. So she developed this grit to go out there and get what she wanted. And she was really good at that. And people loved her. I mean, she would make you feel like the most important person in her world, whoever the you was who was talking to her. And she was suffering underneath it all.
Amazing stories. Let's learn from her. Now I'm very curious about what we are going to learn from her.
It's really funny. I think in part I come, as I said, I've already sort of begun to share the first one. I come from a long legacy of women who have done important, meaningful, and powerful things in service of women. I guess the maybe first and second lessons are really tied together, which is that as a woman, we can do and be anything that we want to be. Mm-hmm. I think I was raised with that kind of grit from her, being her daughter, right? To not limit myself on what my capacity was. You know, she really was a woman doing amazing things in a man's world, like you said, in law in New York City in the 60s and 70s. And she didn't take no for an answer. And she had a huge amount of respect for it. And I think that is incredibly important. Her favorite word was fierce. And I have actually really learned to embody that word as a very feminine yet ballsy word, right? Mm-hmm. To me, a fierce woman is someone who has a desire and a purpose and an intention and is able to stay steady and move forward and be committed to that, but with grace. So not with fury, not with a bullish head down, I'm going to plow people down in the process, but with a grace that comes with intention and care and kindness, but still immense bravery. And so I think in many ways, I learned the meaning of that word from her.
This is sorry to interrupt you. It's a beautiful definition of, in my opinion, what women are. You know, the feminine energy, the feminine power is exactly what you're talking about.
That's right. You know, whether you're bringing that sense of fierceness into your mothering or your career or athleticism or creativity, right? I mean, it can, that word can be defined in so many different ways, but it really, to me, embodies, yes, to your point, that balance between passion and pursuit and achievement and also beauty and grace. A strength that comes in the tenderness along the way.
Mm-hmm. And kindness. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. I think she also taught me, I bring her to the table in my mothering of my own. I have two daughters who are in high school, and I really have learned, you know, I've dedicated really my whole professional career to my mom. I used to say, but before my mom died, I would have told you that my mom was perfect. And then she died 7 years ago, and I did a deep dive into death and dying relationship with her, because of course I was grieving and I needed to really kind of make sense of my relationship with her and my understanding of who she was. And I learned along the way how imperfect she was, and imperfect in ways that, like, I think in some ways it served me to not see those parts of her when I was younger. I think she did a good job of being authentic with me, but not transparent. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
But she really gave me permission to be whole, you know, and to me, that's my definition of unconditional love, right? That she allowed me to feel messy and uncertain and scared. And she made space for that for me when I was a kid. And I think that, you know, that's part of what's allowed me to feel so whole and integrated as a grown-up now at age 50, is that I'm not afraid of all of my parts. And I think the reason I'm not afraid of all of my parts is because my mom wasn't afraid of all of my parts. Does that make sense? So to me, that's what unconditional love is, right? It's like, oh, I can tolerate you in whatever you show up with. And I try to bring that to my own mothering with my own daughters.
We are blessed with similar mothers and experiences. And it's very interesting for me to hear how you started understanding who she was better after she passed away, as I did. And it's interesting that we've been going through this process in parallel. It was 2016 that I lost my mom.
Yeah, 17 for me.
Yeah. And it's beautiful how these relationships stay alive, continue existing and evolving, even when they're not here. Isn't that fascinating?
You know, it really is. And I think, I think my mom would have, let me back up and say again, one of the last things my mom told me was that she had been running for class president every day of her whole life, and she died at 71. And I would say that she had been running for class president with me as well. Like she had been working as hard as she could so that I would see her as a good mother. Right. And I think that what she didn't teach me or wasn't able to teach me, I learned after she had died, is that sacrificing ourselves, running ourselves into the ground in order to be loved and liked, in order to achieve great things, is a mistake. And not in service of the people who we love, right? Because, I really do believe that both her cognitive decline as well as her ultimate death, she died of a heart attack unexpectedly, was because of her levels of stress, in part, that she had buried and worn inside of her so much stress that her body couldn't sustain it. And so I lost my mother too young.
I'm guessing she didn't have any tools and she didn't spend any time getting rid of the stress or counteracting it.
I don't know that my mom knew how to be her and not be moving at 100 miles an hour all the time. So my mom would say, oh, I take great care of myself.
Exactly.
But taking great care of herself was waking up at 4:00 in the morning and exercising like a maniac for an hour before a 6:00 flight to wherever. So she would say she was taking good care of herself, but everything she did with a level of high pressure that wasn't right. So even her exercising or caring for her body was done in a way that would push her, right? Or even, she would go through these weird, like, I'm going to eat really healthy phases where I think she really did believe she was eating healthy, but she would like only drink coffee and eat, so unbalanced.
Everything to extreme. Yes, everything to extreme. It's interesting. I recognize a little bit of myself in that. And I've been working on that for the past few years. And especially when my hips broke down this Christmas and I found a new physical therapist who's trying to teach me that the exercise I've been doing until now, thinking, it's self-care, isn't. So I'm relearning what I wish your mom learned, to be gentle, to really be kind and really take care of myself and not see self-care as yet another source of stress.
Yeah, she modeled the wrong thing to me. I struggled with a ton of anxiety. Much of my life, actually. I would say the last 10 years, I've really figured out how to not live in that place of anxiety and need to be perfect. But she modeled to me extreme in everything. And yeah, sure, I could say in some ways that was helpful. It motivated me to, quote unquote, do great things, but at what cost, right? And so I think that what my mom wasn't was gentle to her spirit and her soul. Yes. I think she's very self-critical a lot of the time. And so that self-criticism, that high pressure that you're not enough, you have to be more, you have to do more, is ultimately what, killed her too young. And it's something that I am determined to change for my own daughters. And so she taught the wrong thing about that, unintentionally, I'm sure. She didn't want me to suffer, but she didn't know how to model anything else. And so I think I have taken what I've learned about my mom and really use that to commit myself to moving through the world in a very different way, which is, I'm going to continue to do important, amazing, fulfilling, successful, great things, but I'm going to have that effort come from a very different place than it came from my mom, so that I can be kinder to myself in the process and not be willing to sacrifice my own mental, emotional, and physical health on behalf of those achievements. I'm just not willing to do it the way she did it.
You know what's fascinating to me, when you started talking about her, I was just so in awe, and it's a little disappointing in life how often when you see these people who have achieved so much, there's most of the times there is a big sacrifice somewhere on the other side that you don't know of.
I agree. And I think that's in part why I said that I thought she was perfect, like you. I've always so in awe of her. And then when I really look a little closer and ask myself some hard, important questions. I mean, my relationship with my mom was very complicated at the end of her life for like the last 5 or 10 years because of her cognitive decline and her dementia. And it made things very hard we had a tricky time at the end of her life. And so when she died, I really needed to do some important work around my perception of her, my perception of myself as her daughter. And I had that same feeling you just described, where I initially felt really disappointed when I began to realize how imperfect she was. Like, I got mad at her, I was like, these are strong, unfair words. They're not the words I sit with now. But part of me was like, she was such a fraud. That's how I start. My initial process was like, how dare you try to convince the world that you're invincible so that we all believe you're invincible. And then underneath you were crumbling and you didn't tell anyone. Like, I was mad about that. And then, of course, with enough perspective and work, I was able to say, oh, right, you were just as human as I am. You were never more human than I was. You were never superhuman. You were never a machine. You were flesh and cells and emotions and ego and all the same things I was. And you were just going about it the only way you knew how. And were suffering and crumbling, and no one knew. And not only is that lonely, I think my mom was inherently deeply lonely. I really believe that my mom was married 3 times. I think that she was deeply she never felt like she was enough, which is so interesting because you're right. You look at her bio.
Yes.
You should see the things she wrote after she died and the things she did. And people would put her on a pedestal like she was more than enough. But here's this woman who I think never, ever believed that she was enough, which is heartbreaking.
It's heartbreaking. And you just gave us so much food for thought and so much to think about. How to understand that we are enough, how to accept ourselves and give ourselves the love we need and lack.
I can't stress more how important that feels, right? So when I heard my mom say she was running for class president her whole life, right? She was really trying, she needed other people outside of her to quote unquote vote for her. You're enough, you're good, we're going to vote for you, right?
Exactly.
But she never knew how, she never learned how to embody that from the inside out. And it ended up she ended up dying too young because of it. It was too stressful. That kind of living on the need of others' reflection of her was too much for her body to handle. Too stressful. So I say that now, and of course it's, I have nothing. I mean, my love for my mom now, it feels exponential. It feels like I can't put it into, like, you can't contain it. It's so large. So the more I've learned to accept all of her and appreciate all of her, which of course has gone into my own work of learning to accept all of me and appreciate myself, including my own flaws, right, is what's allowed me to move through life with a little more generosity and intention and slowing down and balance. And so what initially started as something that she didn't teach me that I felt angry by has turned into the biggest lesson she could have ever possibly given me, which is to do it differently. And I am nothing but grateful for her for showing me how important that was. And I wish she didn't have to die early to show that to me, but that was her legacy for me. And I get to pass that legacy on to her granddaughters, to my daughters, to embody self-love and worthiness and kindness from the inside and to do great things from that place.
How beautiful and how highly developed when we can recognize our mothers' lives as lessons for ourselves and find not anger and hatred and disappointment, but lessons in this negative part. Thank you for that.
No, it's such a gift to be able to talk about her in all of these many different ways. So thank you for the opportunity.
Kate.
No, that's fine. That's what she called me. So you are welcome to call me Katie.
This is very interesting.
There is.
Hello, Mama Margaret.
That's right. That's right.
Is there anything else you'd like to add to all of this before we recap?
I don't think so. I mean, actually, I'll just reframe something that you said, which is just so beautiful, is that our mothers live in us and then they live in our children and they live in our children's children, right? I mean, that's the beauty, the blessing or the curse, I should say, but the beauty legacy, right, is that we take the good with the bad and the bad with the good. And I think the more we can recognize the beauty in that, the better off we are.
Will you help me to recap? So we have had this big lesson about the word fears, and you gave us a beautiful definition of fears, which we talked about. To me, sounds like the definition of what feminine actually means, or feminine energy.
Yes.
And we talked about how important it was that she taught you and raised you knowing that you can do anything you imagine and want. The lesson on unconditional love was beautiful. I wish we had more time to spend more on it, but to accept your children and all their sides.
Right.
And finally, we talked about the big lesson, which came as something she was not modeling for you, but now it turned into a lesson, which is that you don't need to sacrifice yourself pleasing others to prove that you're worthy. And you don't need to be perfect, I wrote down. And I wrote down, you are enough. I think this is everything I wrote down. Did I miss something?
No, you captured it.
Kate, thank you again so much for being my guest.
I'm so grateful to be here. I think what you're doing in giving folks the opportunity to really think about our mothers in this three-dimensional way is so important. So I'm grateful for the time with you today.
Thank you. Please quickly tell my listeners where they can find you and learn more about you. And I will, of course, put a link in our episode notes.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. So my website is just my name, KateKripke.com. And on my website, folks can learn how to work with me if they're wanting support. Again, my focus of my work right now is supporting, won't surprise you after this conversation, right? High achieving women who are struggling with anxiety and motherhood to learn how to move that anxiety out of the way so that those women can still feel successful and connected to their children without suffering in the process. I am very active on Instagram at Kate Kripke. And then folks can find me on LinkedIn and Facebook and all those other places just through my name as well. And yep, the podcast and my book, Reinventing Super Mom, Support, Encouragement, and Strategies for New Mothers Who Feel Lost is available on Amazon.
Fantastic. Kate, thank you again.
Thank you, Anna. Such a pleasure.
If you enjoy Thank You Mama and want to help it grow, please take the 2 seconds to leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps. If you'd like to get in touch, you can send me a mail at info@thankyouMama.net. You can also find me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter under Anna Teider, that's Tajder. This was Thank You Mama. Come back next week, subscribe, and tell your friends.